Welcome to Run It Back, a show where we recap the entire UConn men's basketball season. I'm your host, Ben Jansen.
Here with Grant Mengel today.
The return of the king. It was a big week for UConn basketball. They had two massive wins at home on the whiteout $2 beer night against Providence, and then at our home away from home, smoked St. John's at the Garden. Grant, this is your first time we've had you on the show this year. What have you seen these last couple weeks that make you feel confident or maybe not confident for March coming up very soon?
I do like what I've seen these last few weeks, and I don't want to say they're peaking because obviously they were number 2 in the country at one point. That was a very early peak in the season, but they have started to turn things back in the right direction. And it's really great to see that it's back to what we started with of having 6 or 7 different guys contribute every night instead of just having to depend on Hawkins or just having to depend on Sanogo. You're getting guys like Naheem Aline finally starting to find his way and step up. You're getting Tristan Newton getting to double figures and 5, 6, 7 assists a night. And then, Caravan continues to play an important role as a tertiary scorer right there too. It's just really great to see the bench starting to come alive again, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at the difference between when we were struggling in Big East play and now that we're kind of clicking, like you said, Grant, there's just way more contribution from all members of the team. Like, I remember a big thing during that losing stretch was, is anyone going to step up next to Jordan Hawkins? And that's kind of going to determine how the game goes. That St. John's game, I think it was 5 scorers in double figures. You had Joey Calcaterra go off, Naheem Aline go off. That's when this team is really at their best, as we saw early in the season. When you can take the 7th or 8th guy and be like, hey, this guy's going to give us 15 tonight. Obviously, any team that does that is going to be really good. And then, just who had Joey Calcaterra rising from the ashes in the Garden? The team's really clicking right now. Everything's going. And they also have gotten back to their identity. They gave up a lot of points against St. John's, but I think that was more of a product of the tempo of the game rather than their defense, because they really protected the paint. They had double-digit blocks as a team. Donovan had 5 or 6 on his own. And then against Providence, they really killed the Friars on the glass. Bryce Hopkins didn't have a rebound. It was just 2 really dominant efforts that kind of reminded me of that team that we fell in love with in early November and December.
Yeah, and so we all know Jordan Hawkins can go get you 20 to 30 on a night. That's just not a surprise. But when he doesn't do that, that's when we're actually at our best.
Yeah.
Like I said, we all know he can score the ball. But if he's in that mid-teens range and you've got those other guys stepping up, down low, hitting threes outside everywhere, that's when this team is truly playing its best basketball, not just relying on that one individual.
Yeah, and then obviously we haven't even mentioned him, but you have to be remiss to say he might not get the award because of our record in the conference, but Adama Sanogo, this last month or so, very quietly, not getting a lot of recognition for it, but he is putting up Big East Player of the Year's numbers once again, getting up into those 15 to 20 point ranges, double-digit rebounds every game, playing really solid defense. Because he's a big man, he's not really a guy you point out and is like, this is a guy who's really going to carry our offense, but when we've needed him to, he has really put this team on his back in this good stretch, and he's kind of re-established himself as one of the premier players in this league.
Honestly, something you don't really hear too often. It almost feels like he gets overshadowed by his backup in a way.
Yeah.
Where Klingon seems to get all the love, the blocks, the easy dunks, and all things like that. And his usage is really good when he's in the game. But people just aren't talking about Sanogo, and it feels like he is kind of in Klingon's shadow, physically and just in the sense of what I'm talking about here. So it's great to see him kind of stepping back into that role that the last few years we've seen him just dominate over and over again. And that's just reflecting, like you said, in the play last month and crossing 1,000 points this year, things like that. He's just steadily had one of the not best, or an overall great career as a big man here at UConn, especially in the last 10 years or so.
3 years to get 1,000 points is fairly unheard of for a big man. And then obviously we're in this home stretch of the season. Unfortunately, only 2 games left in the regular season, but that just means March is right around the corner. Wednesday against DePaul at home, last home game of the season. You don't want to overlook people, but I would overlook DePaul and say Villanova is the game that I really have circled next week to kind of it's the last real challenge of the regular season, and then I think the way Villanova's playing right now, that'll be a really good litmus test for where we are going into the Garden again, but this time in tournament play.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. It's a great litmus test, like you said, as they're starting to play their best basketball of the year as well. We'll really kind of see just what kind of team we are, going into a pretty hostile environment there down in Philly, as it always is. They got a good fan base, so it'll be great to hopefully go in there, get a win, and kind of really feel like this team is fully back on track and headed for 2 deep tournament runs.
Yeah, and then it's very, very hard to look at the season right now without thinking about March and those seeding implications in the NCAA tournament. We're basically locked into the 4-5 game for the Big East. But if Villanova can beat Seton Hall in the midweek, there's a very real possibility that game at Wells Fargo becomes a quad 1 game, which would be massive for any seeding implications. UConn, maybe they're on the 3. They're kind of a fringe 3-4 right now based on what people are saying. A lot of teams ahead of them are starting to lose. Virginia is really bad right now. Iowa State has kind of slipped off, unfortunately, because that's a win that we have over them, which would help our resume a little bit, but they're kind of starting to tail off down the stretch here. So I think just staying consistent with what we're doing. Obviously, in our last 8 games, we're 6-2. Both losses were by 1 possession. So we're playing top-notch basketball right now, and we have a chance to really secure ourselves in a seed where you don't want to overlook teams in the NCAA tournament, but you would much rather play a 14 seed than a 12 seed, which UConn has run into last year, obviously, with Teddy Allen, and then the year before when they had Maryland. They're not going to play that type of opponent this year. But this team, more than anyone, knows the importance of setting yourself up with a good path. And the first round and second round in Albany, and then the East Regional in Madison Square Garden, it's very, very clear UConn has a path here, and I think every Husky fan wants to be on that path right now.
And yeah, especially those locations. We've gone into MSG before, home away from home, like you referenced. If they can put themselves in that position, we're gonna pack that place. It's gonna be clearly blue UConn support all over. So that's definitely something that has to be on Hurley and the team's mind in this last week or two here. It's if, like you said, if Villanova becomes a quad 1 game, that almost becomes must-win then, just to elevate you, maybe one more seed line, and then going into MSG, can't lose in the first round if you want to be, or second round technically, but our first game, you can't lose that, whether it's Providence, Creighton, whoever it ends up being. I know it's not an easy game, but you win that one, you kind of at least solidify yourself as a 4 there. I think.
And then I think being in that 4-5 game, if you gave me a choice of who I would want to play in the semifinals, again, I'm doing a lot of overlooking here, but that's what we do when we think about March. You kind of think about the big stage instead of how you get there. If UConn can get into that semifinal, I think Marquette is probably the team that every fan would prefer them play as that 1 seed, as opposed to like a Creighton who lost to Marquette, in which basically determined the regular season title. But I think, especially after that game at the XL Center, I think Marquette is the perfect team for us to match up with, especially in the Garden. Wisconsin is very, very far from New York. Let's tell it how it is. No team from the Midwest has ever won the Big East tournament. Fans don't necessarily travel well, especially opposed to UConn fans. That building might be even more contrast than the UConn St. John's game the other day. But not to get too far ahead of ourselves, UConn has very, very nice paths lining up in both the Garden and the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I would prefer Marquette, especially over Xavier. I know they say it's tough to beat a team 3 times, but they seem to just kind of have our number this year. Most teams don't come into our house and take a win like that. I know St. John's did that, but we proved that was a fluke and that we are the better team than them, obviously. But Xavier's a team I don't want to see. Villanova peaking at the right time, don't want to see them. Other than that, there's no one in the league that really scares me too much heading into the Big East tournament.
Yeah, I think I said this a while ago on our therapy episode, and I still believe it. When this team's playing at its best, I don't know how many teams in the country and the Big East can really compete with them, and I think this is as close to their best as we're going to get. If you look at Bart Torvik, he does game scores, which is basically how well you play in each individual game compared to the rest of your season. UConn's 5-game rolling game score average right now So their performance over the last 5 games is as high as it's been since that first Butler game when we were really cruising through the non-conference and then smoked Butler to open up Big East play. So a lot of people saying, is UConn back? I think they are firmly back to that dominant team that they were, and I think we should start to get a little starry-eyed about March once again. Because last time we did that, it was a little premature because we were doing it in December. But guess what? March is a week away. So UConn fans, get excited, get loud, go to the Garden, go to wherever they play the NCAA tournament, and enjoy the run.
It's time. This is what you come to UConn to do. This is what you expect. You see the banners every time you're in the arena. It's go time, and it's gonna be a fun final stretch here. Really looking forward to seeing how they finish out the year.
Yeah. That's going to do it for today's Run It Back. We will be back before the Big East tournament to give a breakdown of the full bracket, UConn's path, and recap those last 2 games of the season. But until then, for Grant Mengel, I'm Ben Jansen, UCTV Sports.